talk, so we can talk offline.
All right. How do I see the polls, or does Alison just tell me how it's going?
Right, the polls will appear on your screen. They'll appear on your screen.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
On everyone's screen or just ours?
On everyone's screen.
On everyone's
All
screen.
right.
They'll appear to vote, and then I can share the results with everyone.
And then when you're finished with the results, Dermot, if you want to move on, you can just mention it live to Alison. Say, well, that's great. Now we'll move on from there.
Yeah. Okay.
Get rid of it then.
So I'll start broadcasting now. Is that all right? Okay.
Great.
So 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon and welcome to our Tibony webinar this week on Leading with Insights, Steps to a Better Leader, to be a better leader. My name is Ronan O'Farrell and I'm the CEO of the Tibony Leadership Institute. If you're to ask me what the purpose of Tibony Leadership Institute is, I'd summarize it by saying the line, better leaders, better organizations, better society. And our guest this week is going to talk to us about better leaders. And that's Dermot Duff, who's a man of many talents, an associate professor, author of several books, an engineer. He's held senior management positions with ITT Alcatel in Holland and as European Transformation Manager for Digital Equipment Corporation before it became part of Hewlett-Packard. As well as advising several business leaders, he lectures in Trinity College, Dublin, where he is leading the career development for MBA students. He's also held senior roles as Executive Learning Director with the Irish Management Institute. And we also in Tibony have had the privilege of Dermot teaching on our Advanced Leadership Programme, where he featured a case study on strategy, which he has authored himself. His most recent book, Managing Professionals and Other Smart People, is well worth getting your hands on, where Dermot shares some of his thinking on leadership and motivation as it's applied to real life situations in companies. So Dermot, you're very welcome. I know we're going to delve into some practical ideas you have compiled from your experience and from research around becoming a better leader. But maybe before doing so, could you give us an insight into the leadership role you had at Digital Equipment Corporation, where you were very instrumental in pioneering a lean approach, maybe before it was that well known?
Right, Ronan, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to all your friends in the Tibony Institute. I greatly admire the work you're doing, better leaders, etc., leading to a better society. We can see that all around us. So I'd like to share, I suppose, some of my experiences. Probably I mightn't start with digital or computer companies, just to keep it a bit anonymous. I started in the jungles of Africa as what's known as a seismologist. And I was there at the time of the rumble in the jungle, if anybody is old enough to remember that. So that was an interesting time. And somebody later said to me, I was a bit like Forrest Gump, because all the major events in the world, I seem to be on the fringes of them, largely through cluelessness rather than design, but that was the interesting part of it. In digital, I was in charge of the European Transformation Project for Digital Equipment Services. It was one of the first, maybe one of the biggest, probably one of the most successful change efforts, in the sense that even though digital went under, for those of you who are very young, digital was the first big computer company in Ireland. It was the Google of its day. It was a very, very attractive place to work. And there was two versions. There was our version, which was kind of like a soft version of change, where we encouraged people. And we got change starting at the top with the leaders. You know, the leaders had to demonstrate their authenticity, which is a complicated word, for 4 or 5 months before we'd actually ask the staff to change. And that worked particularly well. On the other side of it, we had a much more brusque approach, where you had to go around with your key objectives in your pocket, recite the vision, etc., which seems good and practical, but didn't work at all. So on our side of the house, because of the encouragement we gave, a number of businesses, at least 6, became multi-billion-dollar businesses. So we kind of believed in the softer approach, whereas having been in the jungle and being raised on the north side, you know, I had a kind of harder approach. So for me, that was maybe my first lesson in leadership. Go softly, maybe carry a big stick, but go softly.
Go softly. Very good. Very good. And you spent some time as well with Alcatel What worked for you there? Did you apply the same Go Softly approach?
Yeah, before I left Digital, we had some pretty good managers there, and one manager said to me, Dermot, I was just up with the executive board, and they said you weren't fit to eat with the pigs. And I said to this boss, I said, well, what did you say back? He said, I told him you were fit to eat with the pigs. So carried some of those lessons. He also said to me one time, Dermot, you're very humble. And then he went on to say, but then again, you've a lot to be humble about. So I think I took that attitude when I went into Alcatel, which was an underperforming unit of about 40 engineers, design engineers, etc. And there was literally fights in the hallway. There was literally tears every day. And just by applying the same principles as the digital transformation program, managed to encourage them to be a little bit more cooperative. We divided the people who couldn't stop warring, etc. And eventually came up with patents, 39 patents that led to Alcatel ITT having a separate division completely. I knew they're very smart people there, because like in good Dutch style, I started at 7:30, found the engineers were there at 6:30. I said, oh, that's pretty good. So I started coming in a half hour earlier, but they came in a half hour earlier again. Then I came in a half hour. So I continued like this until I discovered what they were doing is they were using our machines and our equipment and our materials to actually produce the first illegal Sky decoder back then. So I could have fired them, but I knew I had them over a barrel. So I got them to apply their ingenuity to other things, and that led to the 39 patents, which led to a fair degree of success for the company. Yeah, so
fantastic. So
yeah.
turning a what could have been a disaster and a big weakness there to a real strength in for the company and for them, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, so we often talk about cognitive ability and so on, intellectual capacity in engineers and in leaders, but there's a little bit of shrewdness needed as well. So you might argue that maybe it was a little bit immoral to have them over a barrel like that, but I thought it was fair justice, and I think the results proved it. But we'll see later on, it's not all about results. It's not what you do. We'll see that with Steve Jobs. What he did was fantastic, but nobody seems to want to like him. He's not appreciated by society. So it's not just what, it's how as well. So that's the two dimensions.
Very
I would have said I was pretty good on the what originally, very poor on the how. But I went to programs like your own and saw my own character reflected back to me. And a bit like what I see on the screen here, it didn't like what I saw. So that was really enlightening. So education, particularly education into your own psychology, your own disposition, can be very enlightening. I think Timony brings a lot to that as well.
Very good, very good. Well, I know you're more than happy to answer questions later on as we go through the webinar. So there are the opportunity there at the bottom of the screen to put in questions in the Q&A box, and we'll come to those later on. But maybe Dermot, if just drawing on all of that of what you said, and thank you for sharing it. What if I suppose pose the question, what is leadership? How do you see it?
Yeah, I'll answer that by talking about the kind of stuff I do mainly at the moment, which is the school around the corner from you, Ronan, called Trinity. It's there a little while, 427 years. Hopefully it's still there after COVID, with the huge losses that college is about to incur. But I work at two levels. I tutor, which is basically coach, I suppose, MBA projects and also master's ones. And they're both masters, so you think they're both the same. But with the master's one, you teach them something functional like marketing or finance or whatever, and hopefully they know a little bit more at the end of the year. But with the MBA, you teach them the same things, but you're also trying to get them to be a leader. So it brings us into, what do leaders actually do? Well, they get something done is what they do. But we find that it's almost an unteachable thing. So the purpose of the projects is to steep them in a situation where they teach themselves about themselves, the way I learned, etc. And we put them in very difficult situations, not cruelly difficult. It's not intended to be a boot camp, but sufficient challenge in the projects, which will be things like coming up with a strategic plan for a company, steep them in those projects. And then they have to be good at an industry analysis, which is the critical thinking bit. They have to be very good at appraising a company, which sounds easy. Everybody thinks we know how to do it, but in some kind of defensible way based on evidence. Then you have to be very good at innovation, coming up with solutions, and then very good at giving the practical implementation plan behind it. All these things are simple to say, but very hard to do. So the role of a tutor such as myself is to guide them through that. And you wouldn't know at a first meeting with these students, usually in teams of 6, you know, how they're going to get on. But you would know after, let's say, a month of working with them, etc. And the distinguishing factor seems to be, one would be intelligence. Yeah, but they're all intelligent. They've done the MBA. I mean, their GPAs and their other scores are just beyond mine. They're massive scores. But it seems to be the ability to hold, you know, more than 5 or 6 concepts in their head at the one time and not get confused by it. So it's the ability to synthesize, to condense, to simplify, so they kind of get what it's all about. Similarly, on the emotional level, they seem to be able to get the different types and how to respond to them. And with that, they seem to have a range of styles rather than one style applied over and over again. But maybe beyond that, they even have an openness to learning, which we might call humility. And you'll see with humility, it seems to be the supreme virtue. That's what Socrates said anyway. And you'll see it in Irish leaders as well. Dr. Jimmy Sheehan would be a big hero of mine. And, you know, he would be the essence of humility. So what I'm saying, it seems to be the ability to encompass a range of things, both cognitively and emotionally, and have a range of styles rather than a single style to deploy.
And is this something that we're born with, or we're creating it over the course of our lifetime? That famous and well-versed debate.
Well, to be semantic about it, leaders are always born. It's the only way you come into life. But they're always made as well. Definitely some people come in with more advantages than others. They might have more energy, more drive. They might have more original cognitive ability, though I'll see later that can even be improved, etc. But it seems to depend an awful lot on their early experience. By early experience, I mean something that might happen to them around, you know, the 13, 11, 14 years of age kind of thing, etc. And that seems to shape them for good or for evil. Evil when they want to control the world for their own purposes, and you'll see that in guys like Stalin and Lenin. I mean, these guys had horrendous kind of backgrounds. You'll see it in guys like Idi Amin, you know, losing their father, watching them be shot, and then of course they go on to shoot anyone who disagrees with them and so on. But you'll also see it in the positive side, like Abraham Lincoln. You know, he happened to be in New Orleans, you know, not quite at that age, a little bit older, but he saw what was happening with slavery, and, you know, he just couldn't stand it. So one of the things he wanted to do was change the world for good. So you can be a leader for good, or you can be a little bit more Hitler-esque. You know, you can get attached to a dysfunctional view of the world, maybe a dysfunctional view of yourself, and that seems to create it.
And just on that, to what extent is, you know, limiting beliefs that maybe are acquired young in person's youth, how that might hold them back from becoming a leader? They might have what you talked about earlier there, the capability and the ability to flex in different leadership styles, but maybe don't see it in themselves, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're all in a bit of a psychic prison, aren't we? You know, with the things we believe we can do and can't do, etc. So yeah, often if you find the right mentor, like the guy I mentioned, who, you know, humorously told me I'd a lot to be humble about, I presume he didn't mean it, maybe he did, etc. So if you find the right kind of mentor, if you find the right kind of educational opportunities, then you can turn around. So the things seem to be what Socrates always said, you know, it's your ethos, it's your ethics, you know, do you believe in good or do you believe in not so good, etc. And then pathos, which is the ability to deal with people at the emotional level. And then ultimately logos, which we'll call competence or intelligence or something like that. So they're the 3 parts of the triangle. So maybe we should put it to the group, have a quick poll, shall we, about, you know, how they see leadership. You know,
very good.
It competence, or is it what the expression did we use?
Cognitive ability or character?
Ability, yes.
Okay.
Here it is. Character, you know, the people kind of aspect, etc. The emotional kind of aspect. Cognitive ability, which we call brain power. And we could debate these definitions endlessly and forever, but I think people more or less know what we mean. You know, is it your people skills, your charm, etc., or is it your ability to get things done? And I suppose people will say it's both, isn't it? And that's what I've just said. But it'd be good to get people's opinion, and we could call that research if we have more than 3 or 4 people on the webinar.
Yeah, well, we've already had about 70% have voted, so they're certainly giving their view here.
I didn't vote myself. How did it turn out? Oh, very good. So it's all about character. Yeah, yeah. I suppose that would make sense, wouldn't it? Because if you don't gain people's trust, you're not going to go anywhere. So yeah, character is fundamental. Yeah. So if you don't have that, it's a necessary condition. And then I suppose the distinguishing condition is to be able to do something on top of that. Yeah. Okay. Very bright group on here. Thank you very much for the poll. That was quick.
Very good. Okay. Okay. Well, obviously, some of the leaders you gave examples of there, they were in different times, different eras. It's hard to judge sometimes when you're 100 years away or even 30 years away from what the situation people found themselves in then. But right now, with the kind of leadership that people need, the skills they need now for the next year, next 6 months, what how can people really cope with this very changed world, and that's going to continue changing quite a bit, and be prepared really for changes that are coming? What would you be recommending?
Well, these days we always say the rate of change is increasing, and if you look at it historically, around 1900 and something, with all the Einstein stuff and all the introduction of flight and the heavy industrialization of the era, there's probably more change in that scope. And we were always what we did to a certain extent. If you were a cobbler, you were a cobbler, a tailor, you were a tailor. But I think these days it's increasingly about, who you are, what you stand for. And of course, we work in a more networked, more societal kind of way. So it's your ability to get on with people. Like if you're a cobbler and you're a grumpy sort of cobbler, that was grand. But now it is definitely about innovation. You don't have a job or a career for that long. As you probably know, I decided myself to have a different career every 7 years, which is kind of interesting. I skipped the last 7, but before that, I managed to do it. It just gave me more life, etc. So now it's more about
Right.
your personal values, your ability to innovate, your ability to cooperate. And we've moved from that kind of agrarian society to this industrial society. People would have said we're in the industrial age until maybe last year. Now it's the smart interconnected age where everything's based on digitalization. Everybody now, glibly talks about AI and VR and AR and all the rest of it. And these things would have been evident about 4 or 5 years ago. We're involved in some of the projects ourselves. So you can have a little preview of what's changing, but therefore the skills need to change, the technical ones. But the complexity of people who are working in the area, the professionals, you have to understand them at a deeper level. And I think anecdotally, people would say, well, very hard to understand some types of people like computer science, etc. But ultimately, everybody is a person and everybody has to be understood. And everybody has to be approached in a way that's going to work for them rather than just your own native style. And that's what I mean by having a range of style that seems to work. And also, despite all the pandemics, etc., we are actually in a golden era and have been in all the recessions. I mean, people talk about, self-actualization now. Your father or your mother struggled to survive and put food on the table. Now it's about the higher order and worrying about global values and the future of the globe, etc. And that's all commendable. I'm not knocking it in any way, but I'm just saying that things have actually changed. We've moved up the Maslow hierarchy. So for that reason, good books to be involved in will be the one by Simon Sinek, First Start With Why, which, to go back to the Apple reference, they had a reason for why they didn't just make things. They deliberately tried to set out to change the world. So you do need this kind of vision, but the vision can't be just an idle dream. It has to be based on a kind of current reality and an informed view of the future. So in other words, I'm saying, if you look back, we could have forecasted what's happening with AI and digitalization 5, 6 years ago, etc. It's now possible to look at the next 5 or 6 years, etc. But people basically are so tied up in what they have to do today that they haven't a chance to look at tomorrow. But that would be a distinguishing factor of a leader, to be that page ahead.
Page. Yeah, we had last week. We had a webinar with Carlos Ray, and we talked quite a bit about the whole area of purpose. Your own personal purpose and the purpose of the organization, and trying to get that shared purpose of combining the two.
Yes.
And that, as you say, the importance of knowing your why in these times. You mentioned there a couple of times. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I admired so much what Timothy do, etc. But I think, with self-limiting beliefs, one of the surprising things discovered by a researcher, Carol Dweck in Harvard, was that even smart people, or particularly the smartest people, because they'd invested so much in their own education and they tied up their whole self-esteem with their intelligence rather than any other things, etc., that after a while they became reluctant to change. You'll see it particularly in some of the professions, etc. So she called it a limiting mindset. And I've talked about people who are maybe experienced in the profession, but it seems to start in the early teenage years. You know, if you admire a kid, you know, oh, you're very bright, etc. They cling on to the brightness. So they have a fixed mindset. So when it comes to something like challenge, they want to avoid the challenge because they could actually fail. Whereas somebody with a more agile, open growth mindset, as Carol Dweck calls it, you know, will embrace the change. When you come to an obstacle, some kids will just kind of, you know, give up at it. Others will persist. Others will see it as, you know, the next level. Then people will see it as the price you have to pay for mastery, you know, and they're willing to pay that price. And, you know, the journey is the thing as much as the destination is what they would look at it with a growth mindset. And with criticism, they would seek it. And to go back to my MSc and MBA students, the ones that would come to say, well, you know, how could I do better? I mean, they're the ones that ultimately get there. Like if you make a small change each and every day for a year, that's 365, you know, that's kind of an unbeatable rate, etc. And I suppose in combination with that, it's, you know, we're all going to make mistakes. Certainly I am anyway. But it's the ability to bounce back. So you have the rocky stuff, you know, getting up one more time. And that's valid. We want that. I mean, we want effort. But there's also the thing about building in your kind of pre-recovery, a bit like athletes do. You know, they don't run 100 miles an hour, 24 hours a day. They, you know, get into the ice bath or whatever. They do the psychological thing and they build in the recovery. It's kind of like a buffer built in.
Yeah, you're reminding me there of the that whole thing of failure as well. You know, the comment that Michael Jordan, basketball player, made about I failed over and over and over again in my life, but that is why I succeed. You know, that having that growth mindset of wanting to keep improving. So how do we overcome this kind of fear of failure and that's there?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I did mention the bounce back ability kind of stuff, etc. But I was fascinated by the lack of real help on self-confidence. Now you'll see in the last 6-7 years, maybe for the reasons we mentioned about the digital age, that there's a whole bunch of books on self-confidence, but they seem to have the same mantra of just, you know, try again and you'll get better with repetition. They're correct, you'll get better at repetition, but in my experience, people don't actually increase their self-esteem, their self-confidence, unless they change fundamentally and they stop valuing themselves for their level of achievement. You know, even the high achievers, you know, will have difficulty in this area for kind of the reasons that I mentioned. So you can urge them to sort of believe in a different value set, you know, that, you know, you're loved for who you are, not so much for what you do, you know, you have a value in other ways, etc. It's not all about, you know, climbing the greasy pole, etc., etc. But there's no urgency in that. So what I tried to do to put some urgency in it is say, okay, we're going to pick a time where you're going to flip the switch now, where you're actually going to believe in yourself and you're going to say you believe in yourself and you're going to be positive and you're going to be optimistic. We know you're faking it. We know you're faking it. And it takes a bit of courage to actually fake it in the first place. I realize that, but ultimately that's it. You know, you have to fake it till you make it, and you'll never completely overcome it, but you'll get better at it anyway. So yeah, that would be my fundamental point. You know, you have to fake it till you make it, which seems like an illusory kind of concept, but it's one of the few that actually, in my experience, seems to work. With that, I put in a little bit of, you know, loving yourself. Yeah, a little bit of self-compassion. If you don't have compassion for yourself, you won't have compassion for others. Therefore, you won't have the empathy. Therefore, you won't be able to relate to all the different types that are all around us.
Very good. Yeah, it's very profound, and I think even from what you were saying there earlier about the likes of Socrates and so forth, some of these principles are ones that are thousands of years old that we kind of need to rediscover on a regular basis rather than chasing some new fad. But had you another poll you wanted to put to the audience on this topic?
Yeah, you know, I put something there that is a personal belief. I think it's backed up a little bit of research, etc. Another chapter in my book, which, by the way, I can't show you; it's sold out. But
great complaint.
I didn't go one myself. So, so the question is, fake it till you make it. A little bit based on Catch Me If You Can, if you remember that kind of movie with Frank Abagnale, I think that's how you pronounce his name, where he even pretended to be a surgeon. He certainly had a fantastic time when he pretended to be a pilot. He went into high school and he actually pretended to be the teacher and got away with it, etc. So, the question is, Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you'll be right. Was he correct or not? It's attributed to Henry Ford, but I believe Evelyn Roosevelt also said it. So it'll be interesting to see what the people on the webinar think of that.
Okay. Well, they're voting away as we speak, and that self-confidence piece as well. It does relate in some way to humility as well, doesn't it?
Oh, it is. Yeah, humility is the supreme virtue. Once again, that's the Socrates thing. But without humility, you're not open to change. You're not opening to learning, and you're caught in the smart people trap again and again, over and over. And once you're caught in it, it's a downward spiral rather than an upward spiral. Haven't done it once, you're trying to do it again, and a couple of years later, you really are trapped.
Excellent. Well, I think the poll has concluded there. So.
Oh, great.
So you've got a little bit more diversity here.
Oh, that's great. So 82% believe it in the Henry Ford method. Yeah, okay. I wasn't expecting such agreement. Yeah, but as I said, what a great group you have on here. Must be all that ALP training that you've given them.
Very good. Well, just to remind people again, if you want to ask a question to Dermot, just put it in the Q&A box, and we'll be coming to that shortly. And we'll continue on in the meantime. If I can get rid of this poll now.
So Ronan, it's kind of the dual thing. You'll see it in those Chinese kind of symbols, opportunity and crisis, in the same kind of thing. So it's always a dichotomy. You have to be humble, enough, but yet confident. They're not contradictory. They seem contradictory. You have to be driven, have the energy, but you also have to be caring. It seems like a contradiction, but it's not. And then, as I was saying earlier, treat everybody equally, but don't treat everybody the same. You have to talk to different people in a slightly different way, as much out of courtesy, but certainly out of effectiveness. So it's overcoming those dichotomies or those dilemmas that seems to be the things that have to be cracked if you're to be a good leader, which is why we're talking about things like empathy and trust and all the rest of it, because there's a lot in the management books about visioning and so on and so forth, but there's not so much about this. So that's why we have a discussion here rather than some kind of pronouncement on things. And sure, that's why we're having the polls rather than making declarations.
Very good. Yeah. And that without that self-confidence, that healthy self-confidence, let's say you can't really make others confident, can you?
No, you can't. And it goes back to the first bit, trust, which the respondent sort of said, yeah, you definitely need that. And then the next thing then is, effectiveness. So when you look into trust, a bit like self-confidence, a lot recently, maybe not that much that's kind of useful in it, but it seems to me that it's the same story. It's the good news wrapped over the bad stories. You definitely need the affection thing. Salespeople often use this expression: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that's definitely the first thing, etc. But then there's the simple effectiveness, actually respond quickly, keep your commitment, break your promises, don't go around behind people's back and, gossiping, etc., etc. So yeah, so it's affection and it's affection. If I can mutilate the two words there, and affection goes back to the love kind of thing, I suppose. But that's what I say: affect versus effect.
Effect. Okay. And are you saying we need to kind of get to a certain stage of perfection here before we can lead, or is this a journey, really, isn't it?
It's definitely a journey. I think, I wrote this book, Managing Professionals and Other Smart People, because I wanted to write one about managing clever people like yourself, Roland, etc. But a guy called Gareth Jones beat me to it. He wrote a book called Clevers, which is all about managing the real diva-esque kind of clever people. When I spoke to people in the field, like managers and business owners, they really wanted people who were as clever as possible, but didn't want the divas. So Gareth Jones came up with a book called, it's a bit similar to this one, Why Should Anyone Want to Work? That's not coming across, is it?
No, you just read it out, yeah, because the background.
Yeah. Why should anyone why should anyone be led by you was his basic point, etc. And he's saying, well, you become a manager, that's just the authority bit, but you have to do the influence bit as well, and you have to do the caring piece and all the rest of it. So his message was, you have to be yourself. As a kind of waggish remark, you say everyone else is taken. So you have to be yourself. In fact, you have to be more of yourself. You have to reveal more of yourself, but in a kind of skillful way. So he says, be yourself. You can only be yourself, but be more of yourself, but not in a clumsy way. By clumsy way, as I said, when I first got this kind of psychological report, it was actually a Belbin, one on my team role, etc. I suddenly realized I was a little bit too dominant and so on. So if you can, see yourself in the mirror for what you are, if you can see other people and assess them the right way, then you have the right kind of skills. And the right kind of skills seems to revolve about what I said, but also about your conversational ability, the ability to say something in a way that can be accepted by the other person. And strangely enough, if to bring an Irish dimension to this, the McKinsey surveys over the years have always, and this is going to go down tremendously badly with people on the webinar, but they've always concluded that Irish management, whether in multinationals or small businesses, were very, very poor at giving feedback. They're very, very poor at confronting an issue. They would go around people's back and hope that a message would, through some kind of circuitous route, actually get there, but they wouldn't confront it in some kind of sensitive way. So I would say conversational ability, the ability to give a message in the right kind of way that it can be absorbed, that it doesn't completely undermine people, etc. And it has a teaching, coaching kind of element to it. Here, let me show you how this might be done differently.
It might be done better, yeah. And I suppose recognizing that most people want to be the best leader they can. So you're only helping them by giving them that feedback rather than in any way trying to humiliate or undermine them. Yeah.
All right. Are we okay on polls? Will we go on?
Good. Yeah. What's you have another poll lined up now? Is it for that? No,
well,
that's coming later.
Versus effect one.
Oh yes, yeah. Let's go with that. Yeah. Very good. So which would you rate as more significant element in building trust? Effectiveness, doing what you said you'd do, or affection, being empathetic, friendly, respectful?
Well, I think based on the previous results, I think we can predict what this one's going to be. But let's see how the voting comes in. Let's see how Norway votes. Nul point.
Very good. It's interesting on what you're saying there as well about knowing yourself and some of the insights that you got. They do say that a lack of self-awareness is one of the predominant leadership flaws, and it's one of the reasons on the leadership program we've now introduced an assessment to help leaders really get to know themselves better, to be able to exploit that, to really be able to use it for their own benefit, and recognize who they're not as well, which is probably equally important.
There's the results, Ronan. Any surprise there?
Very good. Okay, so 64% saying effectiveness and 36% saying affection.
So, okay, it would be different interpretations there, but I suppose people are saying, because he said earlier charm was really the fundamental, I think they might be saying here, you can quickly lose that if you don't reply, you don't respond, etc. The whole thing just, you lose the credibility, really.
Yes, yeah. That's very interesting. Very interesting. Very good.
So what they say is, trust is very slow to get built and easy to lose. And it seems to arise through repeated meeting of commitments, which is what the webinar respondents have said, but it also seems to come from similarity. So if you have a North-sider like me, who's also an engineer originally, whatever, and, we would, see each other as being, the right kind of people and so on. So one of the ways that you have to improve is to recognize the different types of people and respond accordingly. So if people have different cultures, and who doesn't, it takes a while to understand what the different cultures are and how to actually go there. One of the projects we had last year was a fantastic project in China for a new technology, new solar technology that has been introduced. It's very expensive and very efficient, driven by the Chinese government and all the rest. So after 4 days of really intensive work there and a very long presentation, we concluded it with a little China symbol in red, etc., with the flag, and everything was going to be good. And we put in some Chinese expressions. We had some there who speak Chinese, etc. But we put it a little piggyback beside it to show success, and the whole crowd gasped. Oh, how could you be so insulting to us? That is, you're calling us all pigs, etc., etc., etc. So cultural awareness, you can read it in the Hofstede books and Ehrenmeyer and all the rest. But ultimately, it's a minefield out there. So if you can navigate those waters, you can build the similarity, I would say.
Well, can we jump back a little bit to the whole area of limiting beliefs and, this idea sometimes that I'm not good at that, or that's just not me, or and maybe not seeing that we can learn new things or new skills, continuing to learn throughout our life. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Can we take up new things, new skills, improve our capacity in the leadership space?
We certainly can. I mean, we did say, intelligence kind of helps a little bit in the leadership game, but actually what the research says is you just have to be a little bit more intelligent than average, which means, that if you can improve it a little bit. And IQ these days, for the last 100 and something years, has been regarded as largely immutable, it's fixed and cannot be changed. But the original IQ test was invented by a French guy in Paris, and he devised it for exactly the other reasons. But something got lost in translation, and it became, one of these things that you can't really improve it. Now, it won't improve on its own. Well, actually, it will improve slightly on its own with age and experience, but it can be made to improve, and it can really only be made to improve by doing different things. So my son, who plays the guitar, tells me playing the guitar will improve at 5 points, which is enough to bring you over maybe the average, etc. But then it's the seeking of novelty, the maintenance of curiosity, the extension of your network of friends, so you have different kinds of perspectives, etc. Doing tough tasks, things that really stretch, etc. Having some kind of goal, having some kind of reason to get up in the morning, having some kind of people you relate to. All these things give you a better life, but they also make you a better leader. So I often say, a better person will automatically be a better leader. So you have to get outside your comfort zone a little bit and try new things. Otherwise, you rust out, where it's much better to actually burn out.
Burn out. Very good. Yeah. And what about teaching, investing time in teaching others, mentoring others to be leaders?
Well, they say you don't know anything until you actually teach it. They also say, some people do, and those who can't teach. And we'd be open to a little bit of criticism there ourselves. But that would seem to be the way, the educational kind of piece to it. I mean, you can, learn from your own experience, but it takes a long time. If you undertake the right kind of program, which I presume Timothy would actually do, you can learn from other people's experience, particularly with your love of the case method, which creates a kind of reality, and then the nuance of a situation can emerge. So that would be the thing. I mean, you can see it with things like, you can find your way around the city great, and then, you get the help of GPS from Google or Apple or something. And then after a while, you're relying on the damn thing. You don't know where to turn left or where to turn right. So constant challenge, unfortunately, seems to be the way. So it's the yin and the yang again.
So maybe before we go on to some of the questions, you have another poll there to on that particular topic, I think, to see what the audience think.
All right, so I've offered the opinion that brain power can be increased, and we're looking for a respondent's opinion whether that's true or not. So it's another yes or no poll that Alison, and by the way, thank you for your support, Alison, that Alison's going to put up.
Very good. Okay.
And while we're doing that, it wasn't Alison's idea to have the space age background, it was mine.
Very good. Okay, that's some reason not showing there. Well, let's see.
So what I'd add to the previous mix then is optimism. If you speak to the psychologist or other the psychiatrists, if you actually see the world as it is, it's a very depressing thing, and we all end up in the same kind of place, don't we, etc. But even optimism, like false optimism, can kind of help, because it gives you the energy to go on. Otherwise, you just get into a slump of depression, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Can you see the poll is up there now? Let me just.
Yeah. By the way, I'm not voting myself. I'm not part of a well-known political party.
Okay, we're back up there now. So can brain power, intellectual capacity be increased in your opinion? Yes or no? So, okay. Very good. I think the last vote come in now. One more. Right, we'll take it there. So that's fairly resounding agreement with you there on that one, Dermot.
That it can be increased.
So 87% think yes, brain power can be increased. And
okay. That's actually brilliant. Yeah, that's actually brilliant because the prevailing opinion is that no, it can't. You just look at it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, that our capacity is fixed. So very interesting.
Okay,
Well,
we'll have to get a PhD to put their name to it and put this out as research then.
Very good. Well, just we sort of touched on it earlier, but Anne Morgan has put in a question. In a crisis situation such as we're navigating our way through at present, what would be your top 1 or 2 practical tips for leaders?
Yeah, I think this is my 4th crisis, maybe my 5th, depending on how you count recessions and all the rest of it. But, you know, in crisis, there's always a little bit of challenge, a little bit of hope for someone somewhere. So I was on a call with Enterprise Ireland this morning, and it was the construction industry sector. I was expecting to say that it's all over, it's all like it was in the last recession, etc. But they were able to say, actually, no, it's quite the opposite. The contracts we have now are with global corporations like the famous, rapacious KKK, who are signing billion-dollar contracts for things like new data centers. Now, I know data centers, it can't go on forever, but this seems to be a play to, go beyond what Amazon Web Services are doing. Happen to be in a family that, been dealing with bikes since 1912. They're all run off their feet, selling bicycles and doing repairs, etc. But even if you're not in a sector that looks optimistic, you have to sell some kind of hope. You might have to do some things you prefer not to do because they're just necessary. But then it's about the plan to go on. So, if you want to know why I left digital in the first place, we were doing fantastically well. But then ultimately, there was a lack of strategy about how to actually go forward. And, so there was wave after wave of cut, but there wasn't a plan to really get out of it other than cut. So you might and probably will have to downsize if it's that bad. But, how is your strategizing? Can you look back 4 or 5 years ahead, recognize the opportunities that you can avail of, that you have the skills for, and then put a credible plan in place? So to go back to maybe my experience in Germany with digital time, they had planned to fire 1,000 people out of 2,000. And I said to the guy running Germany, I said, well, what's the plan? He says, what do you mean the plan? The plan is to fire people. I said, yeah, but you have to give some kind of hope with it. You have to give some kind of way out of it, etc. And then people will probably accept the plan at least a lot more easily. So it's a combination of hope and strategizing, I would say to Anne. Wouldn't mind hearing back her comment if she has a different or better view.
Very good, very good. Okay, well, we'll see if Anne comes back on that. She can pop it in the Q&A, or if she'd like to come live, we can do that as well. Now, James Garrity has a question for her. He's going to come in live here as well to ask his question.
Hi, James.
Let's see, is he okay? No, he seems to have not be available there. So I'll go to the next one, which is from Louis Davis in Galway. So Louis Davis.
Hello.
I think I know that name, don't I?
Yes, Dermot. Hello, can you hear me?
I can, Louis. You sound the same, which is encouraging.
Well, thanks for a great webinar, guys. It's fantastic. I'm going to ask Dermot a personal question, actually. Dermot, if you think of a leader, who is the leader that you were most inspired by, or you would put up there as an example to point to in your life, maybe even influence you to go into this field? Just curious. What's your bar? What's your standard? And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Louis. Good question, tough question, because there's quite a few. A few I've already mentioned. Jimmy Sheen would be my big hero, and I think he knows that. Maybe you might know that yourself. Mike Moon, who was my very first manager, he was really brilliant. He was Irish, but had a lot of American experience, and he brought in some of the thinking that would be contemporary today. But I suppose after a while, what I came to believe is that it's as much the process as anything else. And the reason I'm saying that is we had, as part of the digital experience, we had a program that was based on Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I might have mentioned it earlier that we got the leaders at the top to show their authenticity first before asking the others to get involved. That's not usually the way, but it was like an Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program. It was actually based on that. It was heavily disguised, but that's what it was actually based on. And it involved things like, you know, facing up to reality, taking one step at a time, having good habits, and so on and so forth. So, you know, all the personalities are good. I mean, we mentioned that, you know, that Steve Jobs was good, but, you know, and you could look at Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, what a fabulous job he's done to create Ryanair, and he'll get criticized for making air travel. So the what and the who. So I kind of moved away from a big admiration of people and more an admiration for the process by which the leadership challenge can actually be accomplished. So sorry if I haven't put someone on a pedestal there, Louis, but that would be my answer. I wouldn't mind if you care to respond or add to it.
Well, no, thanks very much. I was just very curious. I was thinking myself from a book point of view. I think Jim Collins' work around leadership on Good to Great has been so influential and widespread. And if I may I'd love your opinion on that as well. He defines the 5 levels of leadership, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if I'm going to sneak another question in, Ronan, or not, but
we'll hold on that because there's a series of other ones coming here. So I'll let Dermot respond to that, and then we'll briefly we'll move on because I know there's 2 others lining up here.
Yeah, okay, Louis, thanks for the question, and thanks for the prompt there. I think you know that Jim Collins and I have a bit of a shared history, going back to when I was involved in fairly senior programs in the Irish Management Institute, which were always connected with Trinity, now connected with UCC. And a guy called Jerry Kriener came to me, and he had a small business along with 4 other guys, etc. And he wanted to do the masters. And I said, well, yeah, Jerry, it's all very well doing the masters, but there's an awful lot of reading. And he said to me, why would he read all the books if I'm the professor, so-called, and I've read all the books? So we came to a conclusion. There was a book just emerged at the time. It was called Good to Great by Jim Collins. So I said, will you read one book, Jerry? He said, yeah, I'll read one book. Good to Great. Yeah, that sounds good. We'll do that, etc. And then he came up with this great notion that, you know, maybe we should call Jim. So to make a long story short, I researched Jim, found the Collins name, and, you know, made a connection with Michael Collins, found out he was from Boulder, Colorado, where I met my own good wife, etc. Taught in the university in Boulder, etc. And did all the right things to get him. Man, I really love the idea of coming over to Ireland, and really great. And he called the secretary. He said, Nancy, find out when we can get over to Ireland. And she flicked through the pages. Can't go this year, Jim. Can't go next year. Man, oh man, Jim was so disappointed. He said, I'll tell you what, we'll find a date, and I'll give you the academic rate, he said. And I said, oh, that's great, Jim. How much is that? $70,000 plus expenses. So across the line, across the Atlantic, you know, Jim could hear the pause and knew this wasn't going to be a runner. He said, oh, well, I'll tell you what then. What we can do instead is I'm teaching in the YMCA in New York next Thursday week or something. You get yourself a fly for $200 or something like that, $15 admission, and you get the exact same thing if you want to come on over. So that became the plan. So Jerry, yeah, didn't read a book. But went to that kind of seminar, etc., and grew his business based on the principles there, which is why I'm talking about process, and eventually grew it to 800 people, I think, from the 20 he had at the beginning. So he moved himself from good to great by doing what it says in the book. He's since sold out and started another business originally in Singapore, and has since moved to Boston, where he started yet another business. So yeah, a fantastic story, and a potential hero as well. So thanks for the prompt, Louis.
Great, thank you for that. Well, James Geraghty has hopefully is live now. If not, I have his question here, so I can read it out. You may, James. Great.
Hi guys, thank you for a really interesting presentation. My question is where should one's moral compass stand when you are trying to improve as a leader? The reason I asked that, as over the last 10 weeks, I suppose, as the managing director of a company, I have tried to ensure that my suppliers, tenants, and everybody associated with the group have been shown empathy, that we are looking after them from the perspective of we can get through this together. However, when I went to my landlords and, say, for example, banks and stuff like that, I was shocked at their response. And I suppose it led me to ask the question of myself, am I really too empathetic as a leader to survive going forward? Thank you.
Well, James, that's a real tough question and an ethical one, and back to Socrates and ethos, but also back to kind of shrewdness, etc. I mean, if the environment we live in is win-win and it's based on contracts and obligations, and that's the game we're in, then we have to play it. But what I would say quickly on top of that is, you know, in the early days when, you know, I was around and having gone to, you know, worked in some kind of tough businesses, including that bike shop where we had to, you know, sell each 50 bikes in a day and you know, get them out the door, you know, assemble them and all the rest of it, etc. And it was very much win-lose kind of thing. But as the world has progressed, it seems to be more win-win. So, you know, a person might get caught short now by banks and all the rest of it in the short term, but in the long term, it looks like you will be a winner. And if you look at Trump, etc., who would be a win-lose kind of guy, in fact, he's an out-and-out narcissist, etc., you can see how society at a certain point in time turns. So the banks are notorious to deal with. I mean, people know that, maybe not at the retail end, but businesses know how bad it is to deal with them, etc. But that percolates up even into government policy eventually, and will come to bite them. So I would say, yeah, I'd say you're doing the right thing in the fullness of time. The right thing hopefully will prevail. I don't know if anyone has a better or a different answer to that one.
Thank you,
Ronan, James.
Great. Thank you, Dermot, for that. And Carl Daly has a question for you. There's a lot of talk about the compassionate leader versus the dictator. Is this a new phenomenon where compassion is to the fore, or has it always been there?
Compassion's always been to the fore, but a useful thing, and you know, there's a short slide set, sort of more or less 10 references that can be sent to participants if they want. But one would be a reasonably well-known thing by Goleman, and this is connected with the emotional intelligence movement, and then of course the multiple intelligent movement. But what he says is there's 6 different styles. One would be the affiliative style, which is close to what Anne is actually talking about there. One would be democratic, one would be pace setting, one would be coaching, and one would be commanding. And in the days where you could command people to better physical effort, the commanding one actually worked. But people who've read Dan Pink's book will know that sometimes the extra pressure doesn't actually work. So he did an experiment in the States and then did the same experiment in India. You know, so a reward in the States of $100 or $1,000 is quite something. But when you go to India, it's magnified. And he found the pressure actually, didn't result. It had a negative kind of effect. So with work that we do today, which is social and interactive and based on teamwork, and certainly based on intellect, etc., it's a bit like somebody standing over you as you type. You know, it doesn't seem to work anymore. And that's what I'm saying, that it is a new digital age. And I think the affiliative, empathetic style does work. I mean, there's still a little bit, like I said before, you know, can't persist with this forever. You're basically trying to set a challenge to people, say, look, we have to be world class. It's not actually an option. Anyone who wants to be in the boat and pull on an oar, we have room for that. But really, you have to succeed. You must succeed. We'll help you succeed. And if together we don't actually make it, well, you know, you have to leave the boat. So it's that yin and yang again. It's a combination of vision, ambition, empathy, but also the rigor to actually move people on. Ultimately, if you can't actually compete in the market, I mean, you haven't got a competitive advantage. You shouldn't compete. You're going to lose. So hope I'm not being too hard on people there. So the basis, yes, is empathy and coaching, but it has to be with the goal of actually getting somewhere. It's a global world now.
And that may come from different parts of the organization. Michael Burke here has a question about the sales career and whether you might agree, is it a good foundation, great foundation in learning and understanding your own leadership abilities? And
yes,
is it undervalued in Ireland as a profession, in the UK?
Oh, hugely undervalued in Ireland, and even more undervalued in the UK, where it's seen as grimy commercialism and Del Boy kind of stuff, etc. But I'm also involved in an Enterprise Ireland program. It's called Spotlight on Skills, and one of the big things that's looked for there is people who can actually do sales, probably better known as business development, because sales is seen as a transactional thing, and actually in a transactional thing. And people who are a little bit more like Donald Trump, a little bit on the psychopathic side, actually, where they understand people but don't actually care, they do quite well. But that kind of sale is actually being automated out of existence. So the business development one, where you understand the technicalities, understand the customer's environment, that takes the exact kind of skills that you'll find in leadership. So they're prized and they're rewarded. I mean, big time rewarded, etc. So I would say, yeah, continue the path, get into it, and stay flexible. And I think that'll work out beautifully.
Very good, very good. Well, Anne Morgan just came back on your response just to give that feedback. She's very happy with what you said, and she shared her own thoughts, which was to do the unpleasant things which have to be done, and then plan for the medium and longer term improvements for the business, and communicate those upsides to the to staff, which is great. Good response. Thanks for that, Anne. And then finally, I know we're coming close to the end, so I know Sean, your good friend Sean Brady, has a question for you as well. So if we can make Sean live. Good afternoon, Sean.
Hello, Dermot and Ronan. First of all, congratulations to Ronan and all the Timony team on the great gems of wisdom you have been giving us since the lockdown. My question for Professor Duff is, what can we learn from brilliant sports coaches like Brian Cody, Alec Ferguson, and Bina Dub? He'd probably include Jim Gavin in that list. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sean. We share the same sporting interest, and not long to go now. Let's go for the 6 in a row. Let's get into the top 6. Yeah, we love that kind of stuff.
Now.
So I suppose if you look at all these guys like Jim Gavin, an ultimate introvert, etc., and you look at Klopp, not an introvert by any manner of means, etc. So they all come in different shapes and forms. But what they have, and Alex Ferguson would have been good in the days when you could throw a shoe across the dressing room, but those days are actually gone. So the more empathetic style seems to work, followed by, I suppose, a supreme coaching style, as you'd find in some of the other managers, like that guy who manages Manchester City. And I suppose the kind of Barcelona techniques I talked about, leadership is a process. Well, teaching good football skills and tactics is also a process. So there's method there that doesn't just rely on one kind of genius. So I suppose that'd be my short answer, Sean. But would you care to come back in and give your own view? Because we know it's always interesting.
Oh, I'd say, Sean, I'll leave the last word to you. Well, look, thank you very much for that, Dermot. I think that was the most interesting session with you, and thank you for sharing those insights and ideas with us. Next week we'll be back again, this time with Professor Vincent Ogutu, who is the Vice Chancellor of Strathmore University in Kenya and Strathmore Business School, which is one of the 15 associated business schools that Timony is part of internationally. And I'll be taking the opportunity to talk with Professor Vincent on the timely topic of the future of work, building on some of the points that Dermot has raised here with us this afternoon, and exploring the changes that are happening that will affect all our organizations over the next while, in which the pandemic in some way has fast-tracked for us. Please do note, though, that the webinar will be on Thursday, the 18th of June, and it will also be at the time of 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And we'll send out details about that early next week. If you've missed any of our earlier webinars, you can find them on our Timony website and also on our Timony YouTube channel. Please do subscribe to it and share it with other leaders who you think might benefit from it as well. And in the meantime, stay safe and have a great day. And thank you very much again.